What if the person who cannot stop thinking about you is not wrestling with attraction at all, but with a truth they have spent months, or even years, trying to avoid? What if your presence awakened something so deeply within them that no amount of distance, silence, or distraction could ever make it disappear? Sometimes the strongest connections are not the ones people openly accept. They are the ones they struggle the hardest to deny. There are moments in life when we convince ourselves that love happens by chance. We tell ourselves it is nothing more than timing, chemistry, or a fortunate coincidence. We believe people enter our lives through random events and ordinary situations. Yet the deeper we explore human nature, the more we discover that some connections feel completely different. Some people appear in our lives and leave a mark that cannot be explained by logic alone. Their presence feels strangely familiar before it should. Their influence reaches hidden places inside us that words can barely explain. When someone chooses you in a way that reaches beyond simple attraction, it is often because something within them recognized something within you long before their conscious mind understood it. This is the question many people spend years trying to understand. Why does one person stand apart from billions of others? Why does someone become attached to your energy, your voice, your presence, or the peace they feel around you? Why do thoughts of you keep returning to their mind even when they try to move on? Why does your absence leave a greater impact than the presence of so many others? The answer often reaches far deeper than most people ever imagine. Human beings are constantly searching for something they feel is missing inside themselves. Many of our fears, desires, and unanswered questions remain hidden beneath the surface. Very often, we are drawn toward people who reflect qualities we have yet to discover within ourselves. That is why certain connections feel so powerful from the very beginning. It is not because the other person is flawless. It is because they awaken something that has been sleeping quietly inside us for a very long time. This person did not choose you simply because it felt convenient. They were drawn to you because your presence affected them in ways they could never ignore. You reached parts of them they had carefully buried. You awakened emotions they had spent years trying to silence. Around you, emotional numbness could no longer survive. That is what makes this connection so different. Many people can attract attention. Only a few inspire genuine transformation. Without realizing it, you became a mirror for this person. And mirrors are powerful because they reveal truths people often spend years trying to avoid. Through you, they saw not only who they were, but also who they had the potential to become. Your kindness revealed the loneliness they had been carrying for so long. Your strength exposed the places where they still felt fragile. Your honesty challenged the masks they had hidden behind for years. This is one reason forgetting you has never been easy. People may forget temporary pleasures. They may forget ordinary conversations, but they rarely forget experiences that awaken something deep within them. Deep inside, they know this connection was never feeding their ego. It was inviting them to grow. And the human spirit is naturally drawn toward anything capable of transforming it, even when that transformation feels uncomfortable. What makes this even more remarkable is that you may never fully realize the influence you had on them. Very often, the people who change others most deeply have no idea how powerful their presence truly is. They simply live honestly. They carry their struggles without placing them on everyone else. They face disappointment without allowing bitterness to take over. They keep moving forward despite setbacks. They continue caring despite the pain they have experienced before. In a world where so much is based on appearance, authenticity becomes unforgettable. What this person recognized in you was not perfection. It was something much more uncommon. They saw truth, and truth leaves a mark that lasts. Many people spend their entire lives searching for something genuine, something dependable, something they can truly trust. When they finally discover it, the experience can be both comforting and frightening. Comforting because it feels right. Frightening because it requires complete honesty. Real connection has a way of removing every excuse. It asks people to face themselves. It asks them to look at the parts of their lives they have ignored for years. It asks them to question beliefs they once accepted without hesitation. That is exactly what happened here. You challenged the identity this person had created for themselves. Perhaps they convinced themselves they never needed anyone. Perhaps they believed emotional distance was the safest way to live. Perhaps they decided vulnerability was a weakness. Perhaps they had spent years keeping people at a distance because they were afraid of being hurt again. Then you entered their life. Suddenly those old beliefs stopped making sense. Your presence created an inner conflict they could no longer escape. One part of them wanted to run, another part desperately wanted to stay. One side wanted to protect itself, the other wanted to finally open its heart. This explains why their actions may have appeared confusing or inconsistent. Human beings often pull away from the very things they desire the most. Not because those things lack value, but because they carry the power to change everything. Deep emotional connection awakens fear just as strongly as it awakens longing. It exposes hidden insecurities. It uncovers old wounds that never completely healed. It forces people to face truths they would rather continue avoiding. Yet there is something deeply fascinating about meaningful connections. No matter how hard the mind tries to escape them, they always seem to find a way back. A memory appears without warning. A familiar emotion quietly rises to the surface. A song reminds them of a moment they believed they had forgotten forever. A dream stays with them long after they wake. A random place suddenly brings your image back into their thoughts. These experiences are difficult to explain because they happen beneath conscious awareness. When a connection reaches the deepest layers of the mind, logic alone cannot erase it. That is important to understand. Being chosen on a deeper level has very little to do with appearance, social status, or perfection. It is about resonance. It is about recognition. It is about feeling understood in a way that feels incredibly rare. Some people notice only your outward qualities. Others connect with something much deeper. That second experience changes people forever. This person is approaching a moment where they can no longer deny what your presence awakened inside them. What is rising within them is not simply a confession of affection. It is an acceptance of change. It is the realization that meeting you transformed something inside their inner world. Perhaps the greatest loss in life is not rejection itself. Perhaps it is meeting someone who awakens your soul and never finding the courage to tell them how deeply they changed you. The people who change our lives the most are often the ones we never expected. They are the people who force us to meet ourselves. Relationships become fascinating not simply because emotions exist, but because people spend so much energy resisting them. Many believe that when love arrives, it is immediately welcomed. In reality, the opposite is often true. The deeper the feeling becomes, the stronger the urge to hide it. Genuine connection threatens the illusion of control. It interrupts familiar patterns. It challenges comfortable routines. It shakes beliefs that have remained untouched for years. That is exactly what happened to this person. What they feel for you became too meaningful to ignore, yet too overwhelming to completely accept. So they responded the way many people do when they encounter something capable of changing their entire life. They tried to run from it. Not because it was imaginary, but because it was real. The human mind carries both desire and fear. When someone experiences a connection capable of transforming them, those two forces often collide. One side moves closer, the other steps back. One side longs for connection, the other searches for safety. The result is uncertainty. It becomes an exhausting inner struggle between what the heart longs for and what fear tries to protect. That is why someone can miss you deeply while pretending they are perfectly fine. They can think about you every day while convincing themselves they have already moved on. They can feel your absence in quiet moments while refusing to admit what those feelings truly mean. The battle is rarely about you alone. More often, it is about what your presence awakened inside them and whether they are willing to become the person this connection is inviting them to be. No amount of denial can permanently silence a truth that continues returning to the heart. Eventually, people reach a point where avoiding their emotions becomes more painful than facing them. When that moment arrives, they begin to understand that running never brought them peace. It only delayed the conversation they needed to have with themselves. And once that realization takes hold, the connection they tried so hard to escape often becomes impossible to ignore. The result is uncertainty. The result is emotional conflict. If this person's actions have ever left you feeling confused, it is because you were watching a quiet inner struggle unfolding inside them. They were not only trying to figure out how they felt about you, they were also trying to understand what your presence was revealing about who they truly were. Their silence was not always a sign that they felt nothing. Their distance was not proof that they did not care. In many situations, it was evidence of a battle they did not know how to overcome. The more they attempted to ignore their feelings, the stronger those feelings seemed to become. The more they focused on moving ahead with life, the more reminders continued to appear. Some connections simply do not disappear because we decide they should. Some lessons stay with us until we finally understand them. Some people remain in our hearts until we face what they awakened deep inside us. And perhaps this is where the real story begins. Not with attraction, not with perfect timing, not with coincidence, but with recognition. The realization that certain people enter our lives for a meaningful reason. They challenge us. They change us. They help us uncover parts of ourselves that we never realized existed. And once that discovery takes place, life rarely returns to the way it was before. More often than not, it happens because emotions become too powerful to ignore or fully understand. Many people know how to manage attraction, but very few know how to deal with true vulnerability. They understand how to attract attention. They know how to leave a good impression. They can make others laugh, tell interesting stories, and keep every conversation light and enjoyable. But allowing another person to look beneath the surface is a completely different experience. It requires removing the protective walls they have spent years creating. And that is exactly where fear begins to grow. At some point, this person realized that you were noticing far more than the image they showed the world. You saw the loneliness hidden beneath their confidence. You sensed the sadness behind their smiles. You recognized the tiredness they kept hidden behind their strength. Realizing that someone could truly see beyond the mask made them deeply uneasy. Most people spend years building identities meant to protect themselves from disappointment and emotional pain. Some become emotionally distant. Others depend heavily on complete independence. Some hide behind success and accomplishments. Others use humor, control, or endless distractions to avoid looking inward. No matter which path they choose, the purpose is usually the same. They simply want to avoid being hurt again. Then a connection appears that makes all of those defenses far less effective. Without trying to, you became that unexpected interruption. Your presence awakened emotions they had buried for years. Memories they believed had disappeared began rising back to the surface. Old emotional wounds demanded attention once again. Questions they had spent years avoiding suddenly became impossible to ignore. Around you, staying emotionally asleep was no longer possible, so they resisted. Not because they wanted to lose the connection, but because every real transformation begins with discomfort before it brings peace. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of emotional growth. Many people imagine awakening as a calm experience filled with instant clarity. In reality, it usually begins with confusion and uncertainty. It shakes the foundation of the old identity. It exposes unresolved pain. It brings hidden fears into the light after years of silence. Before understanding finally arrives, chaos often appears first. That explains why this person may have pulled away after moments of closeness, why they suddenly became distant after opening their heart, why expressing their emotions seemed much harder than it should have been. They were trying to keep control over feelings that refused to remain hidden, but the deeper mind always finds its own way of speaking. When emotions are pushed down on the surface, they usually find other ways to appear. Thoughts return without warning during quiet moments. Memories arrive without invitation. Dreams become more vivid than before. Familiar songs suddenly carry new meaning. Ordinary places become reminders of someone who cannot easily be forgotten. Even the simplest experiences begin carrying emotional significance. The mind naturally searches for resolution when emotions remain unfinished. What we ignore consciously often continues working quietly beneath our awareness. This is where deeper awareness slowly begins to appear, not as something supernatural, not as magic, but as repeated reminders that truth can only be avoided for so long. Life begins placing mirrors in front of the person. Patterns repeat themselves again and again. Certain lessons continue returning. Coincidences begin feeling more meaningful than before. Emotional signals keep appearing until denial becomes too exhausting to continue. Eventually, the pressure reaches a point where hiding the truth becomes more painful than admitting it. That is the stage this person is now approaching. They are beginning to understand that creating distance never truly freed them from what they felt. Silence never erased the bond. Avoidance never weakened the emotional attachment. If anything, stepping away only made them realize how important the connection really was. Genuine emotional connections rarely disappear simply because someone chooses to suppress them. Instead, they often continue growing beneath the surface, quietly, steadily, and patiently. They shape thoughts, emotions, and decisions in ways that are not always easy to notice. The ego values certainty. It values control. It values pride. But the deeper part of every human being values meaning above everything else. Once someone experiences a connection filled with genuine meaning, ordinary distractions slowly begin losing their power. Temporary pleasures no longer satisfy in the same way. Surface-level conversations begin feeling incomplete. Shallow experiences lose much of their attraction. Something much deeper has been awakened. That is why they are approaching an important inner turning point. The effort required to hide their feelings is becoming heavier than the fear of revealing them. For a long time, they believed those emotions would eventually disappear. They assumed that time would weaken the connection. They expected distance to make everything easier. Instead, the connection continued growing inside them, quietly, steadily, in ways they never imagined. Perhaps this is one of the deepest truths about love. The emotions we fight against most strongly are often the ones carrying the greatest lessons. They reveal parts of ourselves we have ignored for years. They expose needs we have refused to acknowledge. They shine light on truths we would rather avoid. Eventually, honesty becomes impossible to escape, and the longer someone runs from that honesty, the louder their heart begins to speak. What makes this connection so meaningful is that it was never built on anything shallow. It was never only about attraction. It was never based on convenience. It was never created out of loneliness. It was never driven by temporary excitement or passing fascination. The truth reaches much deeper than that. When the truth is finally spoken, it has the power to transform both people involved. This person did not simply notice your appearance. They encountered something within you during a time when they were emotionally worn out themselves. Whether you realized it or not, your presence became a source of comfort, a place of emotional safety, and a space where they finally felt understood. This reflects something important about human psychology. We are not drawn only to beauty. We are not drawn only to pleasure. At a much deeper level, we are often drawn toward balance. We naturally seek people who reconnect us with forgotten parts of ourselves. Sometimes one person enters our life and reminds us how to truly feel after years of emotional numbness. That is exactly what happened here. Before meeting you, this person may have learned how to survive, but they had forgotten how to truly live with an open heart. Perhaps they became experts at appearing strong. Perhaps they learned how to hide their pain behind confidence. Perhaps they embraced independence so completely that they convinced themselves they no longer needed anyone. But surviving and feeling emotionally complete are never the same thing. Then you entered their world. The emotional walls they had spent years building no longer seemed as strong. The barriers they trusted slowly began to weaken, not because you demanded change, not because you forced anything upon them, but because your authenticity made pretending almost impossible. Genuine authenticity is much rarer than most people realize. Many people constantly change themselves just to gain approval. They change to avoid rejection. They change to control how others see them. They present different versions of themselves depending on the situation. They become whoever they believe others expect them to be. But every once in a while, someone carries a quiet honesty that cannot be copied or created. A calm sincerity that feels completely natural, effortless, and deeply real. That kind of presence reaches people in ways words alone never can. It quietly invites others to lower their defenses without pressure or force. It reminds them that being accepted does not require pretending to be someone else. And for a person who has spent years hiding behind emotional walls, that kind of connection becomes impossible to forget. Even after time passes, even after distance grows, the memory remains alive because it touched a part of them that had been waiting for understanding for far longer than they ever realized. A depth that was born from experience. A wisdom shaped through pain that transformed them instead of making them hard. That was the special quality they saw in you. And once someone experiences that kind of truth, it becomes almost impossible to erase from their memory. What touched them the most was not only what you said, it was the person you continued to be despite everything you had gone through. They watched you continue offering kindness after being wounded. They watched you continue showing care after facing disappointment. They saw you remain compassionate even when life gave you every reason to become bitter. They noticed your ability to keep walking forward without losing your compassion or your humanity. That left a lasting mark on them because, deep inside, they understood how difficult that truly was. They knew how easy it would have been for you to shut your heart completely. They understood how many people allow pain to turn into bitterness. Yet you made a different choice. You chose personal growth. You chose understanding. You chose honesty. You chose authenticity. And whether they admitted it openly or not, they respected and admired that more than they could ever put into words. The longer they watched you, the more they realized that what they felt was not temporary. It was not a passing attraction. It was not a short-lived curiosity. It was something much deeper, something that kept growing even when life became more complicated, something that stayed alive even after distance entered the situation, something that refused to disappear no matter how much they tried to ignore it or push it away. And that realization changed everything, because once a person understands that a connection has reached the deepest places within their heart, pretending becomes far more difficult than simply telling the truth. The truth starts asking for attention, the emotions begin asking to be recognized, and sooner or later, every person reaches a moment when they must make a decision. Will they keep hiding from what they truly feel, or will they finally accept the truth that has been waiting quietly for them all this time? That moment is much closer than they think, and when it finally arrives, it may completely change the direction of their life forever. They saw you keep your heart open, even after facing disappointment. They noticed the quiet strength with which you carried burdens that most people never even realized existed. That created a much deeper impression than any speech or conversation ever could. At a much deeper level, people are moved more by genuine emotional honesty than by perfection. Perfection often feels distant. It can seem impossible for others to connect with. But someone who has suffered and still chooses kindness carries something far more powerful. They possess a credibility that only real experience can create. They carry a truth that cannot be copied or pretended. Your struggles silently communicated a message they desperately needed to witness, not through speeches, not through advice, but through the way you lived each day. You showed them that pain does not have to destroy compassion. You showed them that suffering does not have to remove the ability to love. You showed them that a person can experience hardship without becoming cold, bitter, or emotionally closed. That understanding quietly changed something deep inside them. For perhaps the first time in many years, they felt emotionally safe with another human being. And emotional safety is one of the rarest gifts anyone can ever receive. People spend endless hours talking about attraction, desire, and chemistry. Yet far fewer people ever speak about the comfort that comes from feeling accepted exactly as you are. The relief of not having to pretend. The freedom of not having to constantly prove your value. The peace that comes from simply knowing you are allowed to exist exactly as you are. Around you, they experienced that kind of freedom. They never felt pressured to become someone else. They never felt forced to hide their weaknesses. They felt noticed in all their imperfections and accepted in spite of them. From a psychological point of view, this creates a bond that reaches incredibly deep places within the heart. Every human being longs to be understood without being judged. Behind every confident smile, there are hidden fears. There are private insecurities. There are quiet doubts that very few people are ever allowed to see. Most relationships never move beyond the surface because people spend so much of their energy protecting themselves. They hide behind carefully built identities. They create different versions of themselves that feel safer to show the outside world. They hope nobody ever notices what is hidden underneath. But when they were with you, those walls slowly began to fall. At first, that frightened them. Yet at the very same time, it slowly began to heal them. This is why the truth they are getting ready to share carries such deep emotional weight. What they need to express reaches far beyond simple affection. It is not only about attraction. It is not simply admiration. It is about importance. It is about meaning. They are preparing to admit that your presence became an important part of their emotional world. You occupied a place inside them that they never imagined anyone could ever reach. For someone who spent years convincing themselves that they did not need anyone, this is an incredibly difficult truth to accept. Yet your presence quietly challenged everything they believed. Little by little, the walls they had built over the years became weaker. The certainty they once held started to fade. They slowly realized that the independence they had protected for so long was not as complete as they had imagined. Your presence reminded them that true strength is not found in pushing everyone away. Real strength is found in allowing yourself to care, allowing yourself to trust, and allowing yourself to be seen. That realization did not happen overnight. But once it began, it continued growing with every passing day. Even when they tried to distract themselves, your memory remained. Even when they convinced themselves they had moved on, something inside continued bringing them back to the truth they had been avoiding. The connection remained alive, quietly waiting to be acknowledged. And deep within their heart, they slowly began to understand that some people enter our lives for reasons much greater than chance.